As we begin, I want to acknowledge that this museum sits on the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe Nation, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, from time immemorial to today. This land has been a meeting place of diverse people for generations, and I'm grateful to be here with you today, continuing that long tradition. So welcome to the talk, Pretty as a Peacock, Natural Dyes for Contemporary Fashionistas, which explores opportunities and challenges of natural dyes and their role in contemporary global textile and fashion industries. Today's talk is offered in support of the current exhibition, Nature in Brilliant Color, which is on now at ROM until August 17th. And if you haven't seen it, I urge you to come and see it. Created by the Field Museum, Nature in Brilliant Color takes visitors on a kaleidoscopic journey through the vibrant hues of the planet. But today's program is going to explore specifically how natural colors have and can be used in textiles, which is a focus of ROM's research and collections. Our own ROM original exhibition, Cloth That Changed the World, The Art and Fashion of Indian Chintz, is currently on display in Victoria at the Royal BC Museum. So if you have an opportunity to see it there, please do. Just as an old-fashioned housekeeping note, I'd ask everyone to be sure that their phones are turned off or on silent. There will be an opportunity at the end of the program for everyone to ask questions. But now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Kathy Hattori is a textile artist deeply involved in colors from natural sources, their history, and their modern-day uses and applications. Kathy has been involved with textiles since 1982 and has traveled extensively to learn natural dyes and textile techniques from treasured mentors. As a matter of fact, I first met Kathy 7 years ago in Madagascar, of all places, at a natural dye conference. She teaches and lectures about natural dyes and has taught at Haystack Mountain School of Craft, Chakarag, and Barn on Bainbridge Island. She is the founder and president of Botanical Colors, based in Seattle, and is sought after worldwide as a teacher and speaker on the sustainable use of natural dyes in global textile production. Kathy will be joined by friend and colleague Rachel MacHenry. Rachel is an experienced designer and educator who brings exceptional depth and knowledge to the field. With over 20 years of international experience developing textiles and fashion projects in collaboration with artisan communities for both public and private sector clients, they include international projects for the Government of Canada and UNESCO. Her work focuses on inclusive and sustainable practice and community-focused design. Using her extensive experience, Rachel has developed collections with artisan communities in Haiti, Nepal, India, Pakistan, Assam, and elsewhere, and is involved in ongoing investigations into natural dyes through a research project in India. And you may know her from her work with the Contemporary Textile Studio Co-op here in Toronto. So let's please welcome to the stage Kathy and Rachel.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Sarah. And Kathy and I would like to thank Sarah and her team and the Royal Ontario Museum for this kind invitation to spend time with you here this afternoon talking about natural dyes, something that we're both passionate about and in love with. Kathy, you feel ready to get going?
I am.
Okay. So maybe you could start off just telling us a little bit about how you got started in this area and why is it important to you?
Well, again, thank you so much, Sarah, Erin, and the rest of the staff at ROM. This is a thrill to be here. I can't tell you how honored and excited I am to be talking with everybody today. A little bit about Botanical Colors. So we're recognized as a leader in natural dyes for artisans, and we also do quite a bit of work with the fashion industry. And the work that we do, we're an online retailer, and we're the largest retailer in the United States. And we also have over 20 years of experience working with brands, retailers, and in factories and mills, showing other groups how to use natural dyes and to be able to scale them to dye apparel. And so we also have a very strong education component to the company. We do production dyeing in our own studio in Seattle, and we are always looking for different types of dyes that have the longevity and durability, and also may have additional features such as being from waste products, agricultural waste or food processing waste, things that are organically certified, things that are being grown by smaller groups who are kind of looking to break into markets. We try to kind of keep our eyes open for those types of suppliers and see if there's a way that we can help support them. We are also a pretty proud supporter of FiberShed, which is, I'll talk about later in the presentation, but they are an organization that is global and including the Ontario FiberShed here, that is really looking at the ways that we can create a more sustainable local economy based on textile production and support. Oh yeah, I've got the clicker here. Why do we do this? I mean, it's a lot of work. We're a tiny team, but in 2010, I was kind of looking at my life and thinking, oh my goodness, is this it? Because I had been working in technology, which I told Sarah, and it wasn't really particularly fulfilling, and I just had the opportunity to kind of change everything, so I did. And I ended up working at a natural dye studio in Seattle. But what I found was that it was just really weird that the textile industry was so polluting and so damaging, and no one was looking at other ways to do this differently that I could see. And so I thought, wait a minute, we've been dyeing t-shirts. I mean, we've only done a few, but you could scale this. How do we do that? And so my journey into natural dyes also brought me into contact with these incredible communities. So I was able to look at like groups that were working on it, artists that were working on it, cultures that were using natural dyes, and it was sort of like this whole world opened up for me. So, along the way, we've been able to build this amazing community, and it's just been something that kind of makes me happy every day, that I can sort of strike up a conversation of like-minded people, and all of a sudden we're off thinking about stuff or talking about projects or talking about a new emerging artist. It's just really fun. Our team is myself. I'm the president of Botanical Colors. And I've been working in the field since 2003. I learned to natural dye and work with textiles since the early 1980s. And so it's just been kind of a lifelong interest for me. And I'm always fascinated by another piece of cloth, another skein of yarn, another breed of sheep, something like that that has to do with textile production. I do quite a bit of consulting and advising to brands and retailers on how they might look at sustainability. So I've done quite a bit of that, and worked in a lot of different natural dye houses. And I think one of the things that makes me a little bit different than a lot of other consultants is that I've been down there in the machines with the dyers working on a project, as opposed to kind of telling them what to do and then leaving and hoping that they do the best they can. So when I go out onto the floor, it's really interesting to kind of make the connection with the dyers and explain to them, we're going to do it this way, and this is what's going to happen, and you're going to see this, so that they kind of know what to expect. And it's actually helped me quite a bit. And I've forged some amazing friendships with really highly respected manufacturing personnel along the way. The other person on our team who's very key is Cara Piazza. She's based in Brooklyn. She actually has her own company called Calyx Studios, but she is our creative director as well. And she's been just key in helping us understand how to bring the interest of natural dyes to a generation that's different than mine, right? Because there's such a groundswell, and Rachel's going to speak about this later, of interest in natural dyes from students and people who are emerging designers. Like, how do they make it work for them? And so Cara has much more experience, and she has the connections of those people, and so she's helped us a lot with that.
So Kathy, as you started on this whole long journey, and as you started working in the field, what were the first steps you took when you saw that you wanted to make these changes?
So, I mean, I make it sound easy, but I have to admit, there's a lot of flailing in the beginning because it wasn't really anything people were doing at a large scale, especially in North America. Most of the textile production had left the United States. We no longer had a textile or manufacturing infrastructure that was based on anything that was innovative. I mean, all of the equipment I was working on was at least 30 or 40 years old. When you went into these places, you were, most of this was in the South, Southeast, and so I'd wander out there and they would just look at me like I was a nut. They couldn't quite understand what I was trying to do. Some of them would humor me and let me do tests and work with them and do some experiments, but it was a lot of trial and error. So one of the things that motivated me was that fact that organic cotton was out there and people were using it, and it didn't make any sense to me that they would use organic cotton and put a synthetic colorant on it. And so I was trying to figure out, like, how do I tell them that, there's another way? So that was quite a bit of our focus, was working on cellulose fibers, and most of the mills that we were able to work with were working with cellulosics, so it was a pretty good fit there. And then I did a lot of education. So this was pre-podcast and Instagram, and it was really just going to conferences, speaking to audiences in educational organizations and things like that. I also worked with a marketing and sustainability consultant, Amy Dufault, who's based in Cape Cod. So from day one, Botanical Colors has always been like sort of distributed as a company, but I live in Seattle, and sort of my marketing brain trusts are on the East Coast. And Amy was a sustainability journalist, and she was really passionate about sustainability, and she just had this unique ability to kind of communicate with people that was very helpful for me, because I was always lost in the weeds of technicality, and she was able to really cut through and create a strategy and a direction for us. So she was really helpful to us. But I have to say, like I was talking about, brands were extremely skeptical, and they sort of wanted to dabble, but they weren't really able to commit. And I just happened to be incredibly fortunate that the recycling arm of Eileen Fisher, which is a women's brand, and they approached me and they said, we want to see if we could put color on our clothes, because most of their things were kind of neutral colored. And so we started working together in 2012, and we've been working together ever since. And that gave me enough legitimacy so that I could move and speak and talk and work with other brands.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you actually... Thank you. We got so into our conversation. It would be really interesting to hear a little bit about that whole process of trying to change brands and designers' mindsets, because of course working with natural dyes is really different than working with synthetic dyes, and it changes the whole thinking around designing, I think.
Right. I'll just talk quickly about what natural dyes are. They are derived from natural resources such as plants. There are some insect dyes, most famously cochineal from Central America and southern Mexico. And they can be a root, a bark, a berry, a leaf, anything from the plant. Sometimes it's the entire plant. Sometimes it's just a portion of the plant. And all of these plants have a colorant in them that have an affinity to being applied to a textile. and the intermediary that's used in order to have it applied is called a mordant. So one of the reasons, like, why should we use it is that the textile industry, when I started, was had over 8,000 chemicals that were actually pretty much untested. So people didn't know if they had long-lasting detrimental effects to human health or water quality or anything else. And as they've begun to test and see the effects of it, they've started to reduce the number of allowable chemistry that's allowed in textile processing. So things like phthalates, azo dyes are now no longer allowed. Heavy metals are no longer allowed. And so they began to realize, oh, some of this stuff isn't so good. Synthetic dyes are not biodegradable. And so we're looking at ways of creating a more circular textile where if you're working with a natural fiber, at the end of its life, you could basically compost it. That wasn't possible with synthetic colorants or synthetic fibers. So the thing that I loved about natural dyes was not only the color and the culture and the history, but the fact that they checked a lot of boxes that were really bedeviling the textile industry at that time. And so that was part of it. I'll talk a little bit about the evolution of natural dyes and mordants, and then, Rachel, I will answer your question. So natural dyes come in kind of three main categories, if you will, forms, in that you can get the raw dye stuff. So those of you who are familiar with natural dyes, and I don't know, is goldenrod season here yet? It's going to be here soon. You can go out and forage goldenrod. You can forage barberry, all sorts of things, and make a color from them. So we call those raw dye stuffs, if you will, that they're not processed other than the processing that the person who's doing the natural dyeing is going to do. You can also get something that's called an extract, which is basically they make a huge vat of natural dye tea, and then they concentrate it, and they dry it, and they powder it, and that becomes something that you can spoon out like a spice, if you will, and use it to make a dye bath. And so that's what was used a lot in industry, because no mill had the ability to take 300 pounds of some sort of raw dye stuff and make a dye out of it in order to dye something. So we used a lot of the extracts. And then there's also extracts that are kept in a liquid form, and the liquid form is just kind of the precursor to it being powdered. But in some cases, it's a much easier application, so they'll keep it as a liquid. A little bit about impacts. So water use in all dye processes uses a lot of water. And as we know, water is an increasingly precious resource for us. We've been able, using pretty much standard machinery in the factory, to reduce the water use from a really high ratio of if you had 1 kilo of goods, you were using 40 kilos of water. And I'm sure you've seen those ads that says this t-shirt took 600 liters of water to dye or to make. It's these kinds of ratios that people are very aware of and trying to figure out how to use less. And so we're able to actually bring the water levels down through a much more efficient process. We're also able to dye at a lower temperature, so we're not having to heat everything up and use that energy. And so we're starting to see where I can use low heat and low water and still get really beautiful color. And then the second thing that we think about a lot is wastewater. So the natural dye wastewater is not toxic, but it still has a lot of stuff in it. And so if you know anything about wastewater treatment, they want to make sure that that the water is as clear as possible with as few total dissolved solids or TDS as possible. So natural dyes on a large scale in production, we do have to be mindful of TDS. Luckily, most of the dyes can easily settle out of a standing tank of water, and that's what I've seen a lot of times with natural dye mills that I've visited, is that they'll put all their natural dye effluent into a tank, it settles out, they can pump off the top part of it and filter that further and either reuse it or use it as a gray water source. And then the effluent at the bottom usually is just, becomes kind of pasty, and then they'll just discard that. It is organic matter, so it can be composted. Last thing is about mordants. I get a lot of questions about this. Mordant is a mineral salt that's used to bind the colorant to the fabric. And so without this intermediary, you have problems with colors running, fading, and things like that. We pretty much only use alum as our mordant. There are lots of other mordants that are available. Many of them are fairly hazardous, if not to humans, than to aquatic life. So there's other things that people are asking me, do you want to use this? And it's like, if it's that difficult to treat and remove from the water source in order to make it better for discharge into the waterway, then no, we don't want to use it. And so even though there may be a slight limitation of the palette, to me it's not worth it to have something that is inherently harmful to aquatic life or other life, or does something to the water supply. So, we do follow all the disposal and use guidelines for the city of Seattle, and we've not had any problems at all with this. Green. What? What am I not doing right? There we go. Okay. Now to Rachel's question, getting started. So if you're a young designer and trying to connect with designers and brands, part of it is just trying to understand, what does the brand want? Their conception of what you think sustainability is might be very, very different. And so it's really important to have that dialogue with them so you understand what they're looking for. And then from a designer point, I think for designers, it's really a new experience to have to basically work from the fiber upward. Most designers who've been working with a brand are used to looking at a catalog or working with samples that they've picked up at a trade show and saying, oh, I want this and I want that, and that's going to be the base fabric for our line. When you're working with natural dyes, you're working with undyed fabric and you're choosing color. And so it's really different. We'll often have a lot of conversation about what's possible for them in order to do what they want to do. And things like, what kind of trim are you using? Will the buttons dye? Will the thread dye? Will the zipper dye? All those things need to be discussed with the designer and the dyer before you kind of start working on the project, so they understand the things that they should be looking for. Our own experience is that emerging designers and folks who are working in sustainability are much more open to kind of this brand new world. And so we've had the most success with sort of smaller brands that may have a huge social media following, but they're not like the big US multinationals that are doing, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 pieces. They'll often do a smaller collection that gets a lot of press and interest, and then they'll just keep going and building their brand based on these sustainable concepts. If you're a supplier and you're going to be a dyer to a brand, one of the things that I found is that you kind of also need to know some of the things that they don't really have to think about. So if they've been working overseas, basically what they're getting from their overseas supplier is a completed product that is already in a bag, already has a tag and a barcode, and is basically ready to be distributed. So we're not that group. We do the dyeing, but we don't sew on tags and we don't sew on buttons and we don't do that. And so the designer will ask us, well, where are those things? Tell me who I should go to. And so it kind of helps to build that network so that you're able to provide those solutions to your supplier or your brand as well. I think the strongest thing about natural dyes that Rachel and I have talked about a lot is that the natural dye story is so compelling. It is about humanity. And so when you think about a natural dye and where it came from, there's absolutely no comparison with a synthetic colorant. I mean, we were joking, like, what's the story of a synthetic colorant? I used to be a fossil, or I used to be a barrel of oil. I mean, what is it? It's not very interesting to a customer, but a natural dye, you could say this was used, it's been used since the Renaissance. It was used in Europe, it was used in Asia, it was used in the Americas. It was used potentially as, it's a native plant. It could have been used in indigenous culture. It's all these things that draw people into you, your brand, and what you represent. I think it's a really strong and compelling thing for us to think about and talk about. And then what we've found is that we've had certain customers who've wanted to focus on specific dye stuffs from specific regions. And as a dyer, you can focus on a region. Like the dye plants that are here in this province are very different than what is available in the Pacific Northwest. So you could have something a color that nobody else has because it only grows here, and you can process it here. Things like if customers trying to reduce waste, if they're like, we had a customer who was working with cotton textile waste, and they were respinning it and making new fibers. They were very interested in what kind of food waste or agricultural waste they could use to color the fabric because it extended their story. One really nice project that we worked on probably over 10 years ago was that the North Face created something called the Backyard Hoodie. And when we talk about Fibershed, we'll talk a little bit about this project too, but it was basically they were trying to figure out how do you create a garment that was made within like 200 miles of their headquarters in the Bay Area. And so they had to find a cotton source, they had to find a spinner, they had to find a weaver, they had to find all their trim and things like that. And it was, I would say, mostly successful, but some of that infrastructure did not exist in that 200-mile radius, so they had to do something else. But it was also a very good illustration of what you can do within your region. Eileen Fisher, like I mentioned before, was our kind of anchor customer, and they've been absolutely 100% supportive in the years since. Kind of through thick and thin. It's pretty remarkable for us. And this is what we do for them. We over-dye used clothing with indigo, and we do this every year for them. And this is part of our dye team. Another customer is Harvest and Mill, and they are using 100% organic fiber. They are doing all of their production locally, and then we do an indigo collection for them, typically 2 to 3 times a year. And so we're dyeing well over 1,000 garments for them on an annual basis, all indigo. The last one is Greg Lauren. So Greg Lauren's kind of a luxury brand based out of Los Angeles. He discovered maybe 5 years ago that he had like 40 or 50 large containers, those big boxcar-like containers full of fabric, and he had to do something with it. So he started using this as part of his brand. All of this recycled, repurposed. He'd been collecting like painter's pants and overalls for 20 years, and so we were dyeing those kinds of things for him. But then he also had these fishermen's sweaters that were made from kind of remnant samples and offcuts that we dyed for him, and then he would create a patchwork, very expensive patchwork sweater out of them, and those things weighed a ton. When we were putting them in the dye baths, it took 2 of us to like just even get one of them out. It was pretty big.
It's really interesting to think about that idea that you're talking about with a lot of these designers of bioregional color, like that areas, regions have their own inherent colors based on what grows there. And I think a lot of people don't realize the vast range of possibility with natural color and what a wide range of colors are possible to dye. They think it might be limited. It's really interesting to think about that. Can you talk a little bit about how that developed for you, like learning about the possibilities with natural color?
Oops, wrong button. There we go. Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to think that until the 1850s, that all color was natural color. There were no synthetic colors. And it was only the discovery, they were trying to, I think, synthesize quinine for malaria treatment, that they came up with this color. William Perkin came up with this kind of purplish color that kind of transformed the textile industry, because everyone was getting purple from things like, logwood coming from Belize, or using red and adding, a blue to it, doing those kinds of things. And so the hair in a test tube was a color. And so that really transformed the industry. Of course, it was the demise of the natural dye industry at that time. But it was really kind of a moment in time where everything just changed. But up until that time, natural dyes were every color. And the colors were brilliant. I mean, if you have experience with natural dyes, and if you've ever looked at cochineal or Brazil wood or sappanwood or any of these red dye colors, that that they can be extremely rich and vivid. And people are always asking me, like, but will they last? Are they color fast? And the answer is yes. If you actually dye them properly, they're very color fast. And if you just go to a museum, pretty much anywhere, and you look at stuff that's pre-1800s, you'll see that the colors are still there, glowing, vivid, especially things like tapestries. You'll see them on the wall. And sometimes the yellow has faded out of it, because yellow is the least light fast of all the natural dyes. So instead of seeing green leaves, you'll see blue leaves. But the blue is still there. The brown is still there. The red is still there. So they've lasted for a long, long time, and they will last for the life of your garment. I don't know. People are really transfixed by, will it last? And the answer is yes, it will last if it's properly done. In France, they actually classified dyes by if they were considered the grand tint, which is the major colors that were considered the most light fast and color fast, and they just happened to be the blue from indigo, the red from madder, and the yellow from weld. And so with blue, red, and yellow, you can pretty much make any color. If you needed a gray, a black, or a brown, there were plenty of tannin-based colors that would produce that for you as well. So they had the palette, they used the palette, and to amazing effect. I'll show you it in this next slide. So this is an oil painting that's depicting a mass for St. Gregory, and it's a picture. I mean, it's an oil painting, but what I liked about it was the fact that it showed these amazing colors. So if you look at it from the far right, there's the red of madder for the robe, the blue of indigo, the yellow of weld or another yellow dye. The green, which they're kneeling on, is indigo and weld. The orange from their robes, if it's not gold, it might also be an orange kind of colored. It could either be a kind of a reddish copper, or it could be actually a color. And again, that's madder and weld. So all of these are natural colors, and look how, as they're depicted, how vivid they are. And if you've been in any European museum, you've seen how vibrant these colors of the vestments still are from quite a long time ago. And they're all natural colors. And this thing is dated to around 1500. So that's really a long time ago. And it's amazing to me that you can still see these when you go to like these cathedrals, and they have that one section where they show all the vestments, that a lot of these are really quite old. We also get questions about where we get our dyes and where they grow from. And so a lot of the traditional colors come from outside of North America, but we do get some things from the United States. But India is a natural dye supplier. The Americas have some really kind of groundbreaking colors, such as cochineal and logwood, that completely changed the European color palette in the 16th century at conquest. And then in the United States, there are a number of different dye stuffs that are actually from things that are grown here and have been here. They've either naturalized here or they're indigenous to North American plain states, and I'm sure in parts of Canada as well, that we can use as very good strong dye stuffs. We do have a practice of trying to source dye flowers and other things from independent growers throughout the United States and wherever else we can find them.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about this kind of intersection of like historical knowledge and new ideas around ecology and re-examining things through science that have been handed down over millennia. And I think it's a really unique time in that all those three elements are coming together now in what we're doing with natural dyes. I'm thinking, what do you kind of see as the social and environmental benefits of natural dye production, especially around things like local systems of production?
That is such a leading question, Rachel. So I talked a little bit about FiberShed in the beginning, and for those of you who are new to this idea, as there is a watershed where we collect water, often for either keeping our local environment intact or potentially for filling a reservoir or a lake or something for a water source. About maybe 15 years ago, Rebecca Burgess started an organization called FiberShed. And the concept of it was that in your local region, 200 miles or so, you ought to be able to have clothing that has been grown and processed, and if you're using dyes, dyed in your area. And when she first started this concept, I think people were just sort of intrigued but not really convinced that this was possible. And so she wrote a book about it, and she showed that how you could, by just looking around where you lived, you could find dye plants, you could find fiber growers and farmers, and if you were lucky, you could find mills that would process it into either a yarn or some way that you could turn it into a garment. And so from that initial idea, she has grown this organization to, I believe there's over 60 fiber sheds globally, including here in Ontario, and that you're looking at a beautiful source of, typically it's wool, sometimes it's flax, sometimes it's hemp or cotton that's in your region that you could take advantage of. You can find weavers, you can find people to create yarn or knit the fiber for you, and then you could find someone who could dye it. And it's the other thing that she laid on top of this was that all of these practices could be done in an environmentally sustainable way. So instead of us basically overgrazing a field or using too much water and pesticides to grow our cotton or doing practices that were not friendly to the earth, she was encouraging people to use best environmental practices in order to grow their crops. And she was so successful in this that she was able to apply for and win a very large U.S. Department of Agriculture grant that talked about how they could sequester carbon by some of these very intentional practices and measure it. And so she has been on this journey to do this work. She has had a slight pause because there's been some funding issues lately, but she's trying to claw back that money right now, and we're all behind her, writing our legislators saying give her the money back so that she can continue the work. It's been pretty amazing and impressive to see how her idea has really kind of transformed certain areas so that you can, like now there's a mini mill in our region that can process local fiber. We have dyers in our region. I have people growing dye plants for me. All of this was just unheard of 15, 20 years ago. And so I do credit Rebecca and the Fiber Shed organization, which is pretty amazing, and all of the fiber sheds who have built up their own region for this renaissance.
Yeah, and kind of moving forward with these ideas, I teach in a fashion program here in Toronto at Toronto Metropolitan University, and we're really trying to incorporate a lot of these fiber shed ideas into the fashion teaching now. And I'm really finding that students they're really hungry for this kind of information. I've had students say to me, I started studying fashion and then I discovered how terrible it is and how we're destructing the world, but working with natural dyes feels like a really hopeful way forward for me as a fashion designer, where I could contribute in a positive way to the fashion industry and work within a system that fulfills my ideals and my ethics. And as part of that kind of shift in direction, we have built a natural dye garden at the Urban Farm, which is a rooftop farm at the university. And students in the program can now take a full-term course in natural dyeing. And this is an image from one of the first few weeks of the course, where the students join the farmers at the farm to learn about how farming works. So people here in this image are gathering some of the dye flowers. If you can just punch us through to the next one. And they start off the first couple of weeks at the rooftop farm learning quite a bit about organic farming, composting, and sort of regenerative agricultural practices. And the idea that everything we wear on our bodies is borrowed from the earth, and we're thinking as designers about how we can then return it to the earth at the end of its life. So they learn how to harvest dyes, how to extract color, and we do some solar dyeing on the rooftop, and then over the subsequent weeks, taking the dye stuffs back to the studio so that they can continue to learn the full process. And I think one of the things that Kathy and I are both really passionate about, feel is really important, is sharing this kind of knowledge so that people have the tools and the agency to incorporate these practices into their careers, into their studio practice, into their kind of outlook as fashion designers, to really be thinking about how we can move to a new mindset where we're working from the earth and then returning our garments back to the earth at the end of their life. So I think working in education, it's a real privilege and a pleasure to be able to work with young people who are so, as you said, so attuned to these ideas already, who understand the pressing need for change within this industry, as well as in other industries, and a change of system. And it's really been fantastic to be able to kind of incorporate this thinking into my teaching. We can go on now.
Thank you, Rachel. Just circling back a little to the fiber shed model about economic development and being able to sustain farmers and fiber growers as well as other livelihoods. So what we were thinking was that if I had people growing dye stuffs for me, I could figure out how to transform those into dyes that could be used to scale up dyeing at a larger volumes. And so we would do the textile dyeing, and then we would have a product that would go to consumers. And so we actually have been able to do this in certain instances. So as I was talking about, where we have customers who are really interested in specific dye stuffs and being able to use them in production, we've been able to say, okay, you have XYZ number of T-shirts. You've gotten them, it's part part of the Better Cotton Initiative that's in the San Joaquin Valley in California. And so that cotton's from there, and now you have this completed garment. And we're going to go find whatever the regional colorant is that you want, and then we'll apply it, and then we're going to hand those back to you, and you're going to market them to your customers. So we've done this a number of times on a fairly small scale, I would say, at this moment, because it's pretty tedious to go from a raw dye stuff to into the machinery, but we've been able to start working on that. And it's just been amazing. It's the story is so powerful for the consumer that they're very, very interested in it. So that's kind of how we're organized right now. Is there a question in here?
There's a question.
Okay.
Yeah. We've been talking a little bit now about kind of what's happening currently, and certainly a lot of these ideas are percolating around the world. And here in Ontario too, there's a whole focus on like working with local wool and connecting with local farmers and kind of building back the infrastructure that's needed. But yeah, just sort of coming back to the kind of the history of color and thinking that wherever our families come from in the world, most parts of the world have these really ancient traditions of natural colorants, color that's been used for centuries. And you've touched on sort of the cultural context of natural color. But each colorant also has a really long sort of scientific and historical background too. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about kind of that historical color aspect.
Sure. If any of you have ever had the privilege to go to France and see those ancient cave paintings where they still let you go in, it's so amazing and humbling that, you know, so many thousands of years ago, people were thinking about color and the depiction of images and kind of the expression of who they were at that time. So it's kind of like who we are as humans, is that color and art and those expressions are part of who we are. As well, we have built color to denote things like status, rank, both in Japan as well as Europe. There were specific colors that were like, these are the ones that if you were of a certain rank, you could wear. If you were not, you could not wear them. And that was how people were denoted, how power was transferred and how power was recognized amongst societies. And so it became the message. Like if you were rich enough to wear red, there's this one picture, I'm trying to think, I think it's a Rembrandt. It's the cover image of this book called A Perfect Red. That's probably, it was talking about the story of Cochineal. And it's this elderly, very severe-looking man, and he's wearing a red turban, just kind of a loose red turban. And it's like he's wearing a Ferrari on his head, because you couldn't wear red unless you were very, very rich. And I just thought it was an amazing depiction of how powerful that color was during those times. And the other thing that I love about natural colors is that each of them is people came upon color kind of through accident, observation, maybe some weird little chemical reaction that happened. When an indigo leaf fell into a pool of dirty water that it maybe had some ash water in it, and all of a sudden they saw something that was changing a color. People were that observant about their environment to be able to see that, this could do something, not only on the color side, but also as medicine, some type of therapy. There's tons of botanical medicine, herbal medicine, cultures that have plant-based medicine that was part of who they were as a culture and a society. So I talked a little bit about colors being both medicinal, but also coming from sacred sites. So if there were geographic occurrences that were considered sacred to a group, sometimes like the pigment, if it were an ochre or something like that, they could pull that and that would become sacred earth, if you will, or a sacred color or something that would help heal or protect. And they could do that with plants, they could do that with ochres, minerals, even dirt. If you've ever been to Chimayo in New Mexico, there's like one chapel that has this sacred earth, and people will go there and just to either touch it or get a tiny little vial of it to help them heal. And then, of course, things like religious ceremonies or the season. I think we were talking amongst ourselves of that in Japan, the food seasons. There's like so many food seasons. It's much more than just 4. It's something like 72 or some incredible number where it's all based on seasonality and the importance of seasonality of a particular foodstuff or plant or a gift from the sea that is in season at that time. And it's the same with color. I mean, like, you've heard nobody wears white after Labor Day. There were very stringent requirements of when you could wear color and when you wouldn't wear color. And all sorts of religious ceremonies or expressions of faith based on those colors.
And it's time for us to wrap up. So what do you see happening with natural dyeing? What would you like to see happening with natural dyeing? And where are you taking things?
Oh boy, what a wish list. So I feel like if natural dyeing were to play a larger role in conventional textile dyeing, that would be pretty exciting. The provisos being that it would have to be less impactful than what we do conventionally. If people are, clear-cutting forests in order to get a dye stuff, that's not going to help us. So it would have to be on a sustainable level. But I think that also forces some thinking about, like, how much do we really need? And what color does it really need to be? And where do we get that color? So having the start of that conversation would be amazing. And I know that among like-minded audiences, that conversation has happened and is happening, but I would love to see that kind of people thinking about that more. I have hope that it will occur because I was reading the Organic Trade Association, kind of their timeline about organic food. And when organic food was first introduced into the US market, it was considered substandard, ugly, maybe not as nutritious as, a little lumpy apple as opposed to a really shiny, huge, genetically engineered apple. This thing wasn't as good. But now, 85% of US households actually consume something that's organic today. So it has happened and it will happen. I would love to see the economies of textile production return to the regions. I think fiber shed is important. And I'm going to turn it over to you for your wish list.
I think that it's part of a bigger picture, of course, and it's involving advocacy and education. But I really feel like people are ready for it, and with that kind of willingness and enthusiasm that I see, especially amongst younger and emerging designers, I really feel hopeful that we can start to institute some of these changes and really shift the mindset of both the design community and consumers around what color is and how we wear and understand color.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you for so generously sharing your expertise. When we were giving this opportunity to talk about natural dyes and contemporary fashion, I said it has to be Kathy in conversation with Rachel. And I think I was right, so thank you. But we're going to open up the floor now to questions. I'm so happy to see the audience, to see the auditorium filled today. So if you have questions, we do have some The programs team with microphones, I think I see them coming down the side, so please raise your hand and we will pass a mic to you. I see a fellow up front here with a white hat on. For right now. Oh, sorry, I see a white and blue hat and a white hat. So I guess we can start with the front row and then move to the second row.
Thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation. So given that 8 billion pieces of clothing are manufactured every year and the average lifespan is being worn 5 times, I like when you talked about natural fiber coming from plants and stuff, but my question is, if the extraction requires the death of the plant, and given that a lot of plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen, has any studies been done on the quantities of potential environmental impact with plants that have to actually be killed to extract the dyes compared to maybe the hydrocarbons, which also have an environmental impact for artificial dyes? And I mean, it's a delicate thing. I mean, ideally, obviously, people would wear clothes more than 5 times, but that's a whole other story.
We'll share. Yeah, I think we need more research, always, yeah. But I think not all dye plants are required to be killed in order to be used. And a lot of traditional use of dye plants, communities use parts of the plant so the plant can continue to live and regenerate. And I'm sure you saw that in Bali as well, where there's a lot of knowledge that's handed down from generation to generation around how to work in a reciprocal way with plants so that you're not just harvesting. It's a slightly different idea. And I think we can learn a lot from that mindset and that way of thinking about how we might move forward with dye plants on a slightly larger scale.
So what's the ratio now?
It really would depend on which community you're looking at. It's quite cultural. Yeah? No, I don't think I could give a range. So yeah, the question is, just say again so I can repeat.
Yeah, what would be the range of plant, like a range of the percentage or ratio of plants that would have to be killed as opposed to those that can be partially harvested and still?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really dependent on the dye stuff. But for example,
location. Yeah.
black walnut. You don't have to cut down the tree in order to get black walnut dye. You get it from the husk of the black walnut, which is actually inedible. And it's the nut, which is the nut meat, then the shell, and then this big green spongy thing called the husk or the hull, and it's the hull that has the color. So what you do need to do is remove the hull, and then you could eat the nut. You could use the shell for grit or some sort of abrasive. So you're not killing, I guess you're harvesting the hull, but you're not killing the tree to do that. The natural dyes that are dye woods, they're much less prevalent in our practice because we're familiar, we're understanding it's a tree. A tree takes 30 to 40 years to grow. You don't want to cut down a tree if you can avoid it. So things like when we ask for logwood, logwood is a dye wood. It comes from a tree that is cut. And so our supplier has to actually go to the country capital, apply for a permit, get permission to harvest one tree. And so that's what he does. He harvests one tree. From that tree, he gets enough logwood for probably 5 years worth of supplying us. So it's not clear cutting. It is taking a tree, but once he takes the tree, then it gets inspected, and then he can process it, and then we use it. For things that are grown like crops, such as indigo, it's grown like an agricultural crop. And the thing with indigo that we've seen in cultivation worldwide is that it's not necessarily that you're not growing food and you're growing indigo. Indigo can be a crop that's grown when a field is fallow because it has nitrogen fixing capabilities in it, depending on the indigo species that you grow. Or in the case of places where culturally indigo was grown in place of foodstuffs, and so there's a real resistance to growing indigo because people were both enslaved and starved. They're growing it now on land that cannot support any other type of growth other than indigo, and that any place that's used for food is still reserved for food. So I think there's a bit of mindfulness on what we're doing. But yeah, there's always room for improvement, and there's always room for research on what we could do. It's really more that the effluent and residual effects are so different than having a petrochemical-based colorant.
Thank you.
Each dye is different. So.
I think then we had a question in the second row.
Thank you. Really, this has just been a wonderful presentation, and I've learned so much from it. I'm at the beginning of doing upcycling of existing garments, and my question may be like obvious, the answer to it, but being hopeful, I'm wondering, because I see many of the garments that I upcycle are, of course, made from polyester and synthetics. And is there any way that one can recolor existing garments if they're already dyed with synthetics?
If you have something that's predominantly natural fiber and it's already got a color on it and you want to add a natural color to it, you absolutely can do that, sure. And we do that all the time. So we don't always get, like when we're doing upcycling projects, we don't always get white garments. We get woven stripes, we get, stuff. Depending on the dye color you choose, it may or may not cover it the way you are thinking, but it's always kind of a happy accident. So I would encourage you to just experiment. I mean, what we found in a lot of cases is that indigo tends to be the one that covers up the most sins, if you will. So if you learn indigo and learn how to make a vat correctly, that could be very powerful for you if you're using things that are like yellow or orange or other colors as a base.
But that can only be done with natural fibers, right?
Yes, if it's a polyester-based fiber, then the color will not take. If it's a poly-cotton blend, then the color will sort of take. So if you can get to as much natural fiber content as possible, you'll have more success.
I think there was a question, was it there on the left along the edge or not anymore? Okay, then I see a raised hand here in a black top. Here comes, well, not everyone can hear though. Okay, here we go.
Sort of touching on what you were just saying, but you mentioned it earlier also, of like if you dye it correctly, it'll be more color fast. I was wondering if you could touch more on what you meant by that, and what is dyeing correctly, what is dyeing not correctly.
Do you have a lot of time?
Yeah. How much time do you have? Basically, if you just read old dye texts, or if you read, any dye book, they emphasize the preparation of the fiber or the garment. It's kind of like the dyeing itself is sort of secondary. It's really how is it prepped, and so is it clean enough, and is it mordanted correctly? It's the absolute most boring part of the process, which is why a lot of people kind of don't want to do it, or they're like, oh, do I really need to? But we found that when we don't do it, that's when we have the regrets. So there was a hashtag that after I gave a talk a few years ago that was going around, and it was called Scared into Scouring. And it's because scouring is the cleaning process of the fiber before you apply the mordant. And then once the mordant is applied, then you actually do the dyeing. And so it's that whole process that makes for a successful dye job.
Hi.
Erin's got her hand raised.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Emperor Vespasian instituted a tax on urine for dyeing, and at some point in France, the public washrooms was known as Vespasien's. So is urine still an option as a mordant for dyeing today?
There's been lots of uses for urine. Actually, Amy Dufault, who I was talking about, she's working in wastewater now, and so the virtues of urine, she's told me a lot about. But so urine was used in indigo dyeing mostly because you could actually ferment it into something that was like ammonia, right? And ammonia had a high pH, and it was used in order to make the indigo vat. And according to what I've heard, and maybe somebody's done that, but it was really wonderful for wool. So wool fiber dyeing, wool yarn dyeing with what they would call a sig vat was supposed to be the best. I have never tried this, and I'm not sure how interested I am, but if someone has and can share their experience, that would be great.
Yeah, another area that where urine was used extensively is in lichen dyeing, and you see lichen dyeing across the northern European, Scandinavian countries, northern UK. If you think of something like Harris tweed that has teeny little flecks of color in it, and traditionally those would have been lichen dyes because you can get some really beautiful, brilliant, like lilacs and oranges and things. And just with the chemical properties that Kathy is describing, changing the pH, that's what was necessary, and you actually had to soak the lichen in the urine for a very long time, and I think it was a really, really smelly process. But that traditionally was how those beautiful, like little sharp dots of color were obtained, again with wools.
Erin, I'm sorry, I don't have my phone up here. How many more questions can we take?
Maybe we'll take another 2 questions, one from either side, and then for those who don't get their questions answered, there is going to be an opportunity to chat outside of the theater.
So we'll take 2 more questions.
So maybe take one from the other side first, if there is one. Oh, there's one right here. There we go.
Hi, Kathy. Nice to see you in person and not on my computer screen. Welcome to Toronto. My question is around safety. I don't have the luxury of a studio, and I'm wondering how safe can I do this in my condo kitchen? I, like you, only use alum at the moment, but I would like to use iron.
Okay, you can work very safely. Yeah, so basically when you're doing natural dyeing, or actually any type of dyeing, if you decided that you want to do tie-dye RIT kind of stuff, you need to keep whatever tools you use separate from kitchen tools. And then I've had to work out of a kitchen dye studio for a long time as well. Basically I cover all surfaces. Like I don't keep, like if I have kitchen tools and things like that, I'll just move those out and then basically cover all countertops and tables and put down a tarp. And then when you're doing the work, if you have a hood, a vent, turn that thing on and make sure you have pretty good ventilation. And then I always wear a mask. And so you can measure the powders then. Iron is perfectly fine to use, but it is toxic to kids, because they have very small bodies. So if you have small children and you're using iron powder, you don't want to have those 2 things next to each other. You can make an iron solution and just keep it in a tightly lidded jar and then use that as needed so that you're not dispensing powders all the time. So again, none of this is considered toxic, but of course none of it is edible either. And so you're just keeping your tools separate. You're keeping your work surfaces as clean as possible. I clean up every spill immediately after it happens. I don't let things just sit. And I haven't had any problems. And things like young kids and pets, keep them out of while you're doing the dye process. Just keep them away. And you should be perfectly fine.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think making the iron acetate is a really good, safe way to work with iron. And just do wear gloves, because iron is absorbable through the skin. And again, a small exposure isn't a problem, but continued exposure is. So just get yourself some gloves and you'll be safe that way.
And we've got one final question here on the left.
Thank you. Yeah, could you just explain, because you had mentioned that synthetic dyes make natural fibers non-biodegradable, and so I'm just curious about that, and if it then means like only a white natural fiber would be biodegradable, or does it also make like a synthetically dyed natural fiber no different from a synthetic fiber? Sorry, I know there was a lot in there.
It's still different. I mean, I would say synthetically dyed natural fiber is better than synthetically dyed synthetic fiber, because that is completely non-biodegradable. And it sheds microplastics, which are getting into our waterways and oceans and bodies. Yeah, sounds like, I don't know, I read somewhere that we eat 1 credit card's worth of plastic a week or something. I was like, oh no. But yeah, so because it just doesn't break down. Like, how much of an impact is that? I actually don't know, because there's not that much dye, synthetic dye on a garment. So if you are composting it and you end up with maybe like 1/2 gram of synthetic dye in your compost, I don't know. Do you think that that's as big of a deal?
I think it's all about scale, right?
Yeah.
Like if our clothing is ending up in landfills and rotting over time, and the synthetic dyes, even in natural garments, are finding their way into waterways, that all creates problems, right? It's like we need different thinking around the whole system.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like percentages and amounts per garment, but it's more like we kind of need to rethink the whole thing, right?
Yeah. Why are we doing this? And it's, excuse me, the amount of textile waste that's thrown away, at least in the United States, is something like 15 million tons. So it's annually. And so it's a lot. In terms of scale, it's a lot. So I think at that point, you're like, maybe that then becomes the problem.
Well, thank you again, Kathy and Rachel, for being so generous with your wide expertise. And as Erin mentioned, we have the opportunity to continue the conversation just outside the doors where there's a reception. So we hope you will all join us there and we can keep talking about all of these issues. I know that there are still a lot of questions out there. Also, I just want to mention briefly that at ROM we have a Friends of Textiles and Costume group, and they are just relaunching. They have a table out there with information, so if you want to get more involved with fashion and textiles at the ROM, please speak to them. But again, thanks to Kathy and Rachel and all of you for being here, and we wish you all a good evening and hope to see you again soon.